Hello and welcome to another episode of All Elite Arcade, your home for video game discussions here at AEW Games. I am your co-host, Evil Uno, always here with the ever-lovely The Chugs. How are you, Chugs?
Oh, thank you, Uno. I'm doing great, man. It's been a fun week for gaming for me and you, I think. I'm excited to dive into this today.
Me too.
Which, to be fair, it's always a fun week of gaming.
We make sure that we're always playing a ton of stuff, so we're always having a good time. But I had and we'll get into it very shortly, but I had an especially good time with Black Myth Wukong. I know a lot of people are playing it right now. And we'll try to stay spoiler-free on our discussions of it, but we've been playing a lot of it, about 10 hours. But before we get into that, I do want to mention that you did not, but I just came back from London a few days ago. AEW All In, the pay-per-view was last week. We did an episode just before it happened, and so I couldn't discuss some of the stuff. I don't want to talk about the wrestling. This is not what we do here. No wrestling talk here. We're talking strictly video games. But if you didn't know, during our pay-per-view, Will Ospreay got to do something very cool, which is not his first time he's done it, but AEW partnered with Ubisoft, and Will Ospreay got to come out as one of the assassins from Assassin's Creed, including the crest, including Shinobi warriors doing flips in front of him. But the coolest part of it all is that they had a video package before it, and the voice of Ezio of Assassin's Creed 2 speaks directly to Will Ospreay in a video. He actually wrote or read some lines written for him. Sorry, my vocabulary not great. But I thought, like, of everything else, I thought it was so cool and impressive of an entrance, but the fact that they went the extra mile and got the voice of Ezio to do the voiceover, I thought was incredible. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube as well. You can rewatch our pay-per-view, AEW All In, on all of your providers right now. But I thought that was super cool.
I did too, and Uno, I completely agree with you. Oh, and, well, for me too, it was the coolest entrance of the entire night for me.
Yes, I agree.
Again, just so awesome. Again, between the performance that was happening and the gear, but again, I'm with you. The video beforehand gave me chills. I was like, this is so freaking awesome. So again, huge thank you to Ubisoft, and very excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows.
Me too. Yeah, I believe it comes out early November, and as far as the setting goes, it's definitely something I'm more interested in. I feel like we've done a lot of European cities before, and to have it in an Asian country for once is going to be very, very interesting.
I agree. Immediately grabbed my attention. I was I know it's a different game, but I was a huge Ghost of Tsushima fan. So to see Assassin's Creed take on an environment like that, Shadows looks excellent from even the previews I've seen. So, but again, that entrance ruled. It was awesome.
Yes, I'm very excited for Will, because I know he's been a huge Assassin's Creed fan for a very long time. He's talked publicly about it on like IGN, GameSpot, and a ton of other places. But like, part of when he started wrestling, they told him to have a character, and the only thing he could attach to was Assassin's Creed at the time. And that speaks to me, because I started wrestling, I was 14, and they're like, hey, you've gotta have a professional wrestling character, and all I could attach to was video games. I was like, if it's not wrestling, what else is in my life? Right. And it pays off. It pays off when you stick around long enough. Your appreciation for both worlds ends up mingling, especially like it did for Will Ospreay.
Absolutely.
All right, we teased it, but Black Myth Wukong came out last week, and we talked about it real quickly, about how it's been selling like hotcakes, how it has the largest user base for a single-player game on Steam as of yet. But now both of us are about 15-plus hours, I would say, into the game.
That sounds about right.
And I don't want to spoil anything. I'll talk about difficulty of bosses, but I won't mention story beats. I won't mention even in case you don't want details about bosses, I won't mention any details about bosses either. But I can tell you this, 15 hours in, and this is making my Game of the Year list for sure.
Absolutely. No question. Again, for me, I know I keep saying this, and I don't mean to keep bringing it up, but Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to be very, very hard to top for me as far as Game of the Year. However, there is no question in my mind that this game is going to be on many people's Game of the Year list.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, on many people's lists, I think this game is going to win.
I think so
it is
too.
It's such a mixture of some of my favorite games and different concepts where, for example, when Lies of P came out, of course that had Souls, Bloodborne inspiration, but Lies of P was its own thing.
Yeah.
Black Myth is like, has Souls inspiration, but also like Devil May Cry,
Yep.
also God of War, also Neo in a lot of different ways. It is absolutely its own game. And to me, it started off really, really strong. Really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
But Uno, I don't know if you agree, but as time has gone on, I'm enjoying it even more.
Yeah.
Even more.
That opening, so it has a huge opening cutscene that at first I was like amazed. I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is a grandiose story. The budget in this one cutscene alone is enough. And then I played maybe 8 hours before I realized that I was still kind of in a tutorial area. Like there's a moment of realization where you realize like, oh, okay, I'm moving on to like the next part of this game. And now that I'm in that next step of the game, it is much larger than I anticipated. What I like about this game a whole lot is like combat actually I feel it's more Bloodborne-ish than it is Dark Souls-ish. It almost it helps to be more aggressive in these games, it seems, than being limiting yourself to parry or trying to roll out of the way all the time. Sometimes it is much easier to beat a boss by just coming in and getting in close and trying to attack him constantly.
Yeah, and interesting going off of you mentioning that, Uno, if you don't mind. But what I love too is, again, how everyone's play styles could be different. Yeah. First of all, the use of spells and things is one of the coolest aspects of the game and makes it feel like very original combat. But I also noticed, depending on what type of boss, there have been many times, because at the moment I'm streaming Black Myth Wukong, and I did a vote, and it was decided that's all I'm going to play. We're going to put the 5-game cycle on hold. But I've noticed sometimes, because generally I'm very aggressive, for certain bosses, if you're too aggressive, you get demolished.
Yes.
And how, like, it's interesting how you go in, you get a couple hits, you go back, you have to find that perfect opening or that perfect pattern to go back in and do hits and play very, very patiently while also playing very aggressive when you have that one opening. So it's really awesome.
Yeah, there's like a whole technical aspect to it because like there's also multiple stances so there's like a very deep unlock tree as you're playing. You know, like you can invest in a lot of stats, but you can also invest in a lot of maneuvers and new stances and spells and improve pretty much every aspect of what you unlock in this. You're capable of improving it. And so you can really tailor the experience to the way you prefer to do it. So like, for example, I've invested so much in one of my spells that I know I'll be using that spell for good, but that spell eventually you can roll out and put a different spell in that position. So that's like super interesting. And then I've only dabbled a little bit with the stances. I'm mainly use the main stance, but there's been a few bosses where I've switched over and I realized like, oh, if I put investment in this stance, it would be better off playing against this boss, because rather than hit 6 consecutive hits, I could hit one giant one and roll away and probably have given it more damage. So it's been very interesting to see that there's there is variety to the gameplay. My experience will be different from yours, and that also goes for how we explore the map, because and I haven't seen the entirety of it. This is not like an Elden Ring where every single part. First of all, there is no visual map, which is fascinating of a choice, because it feels like, especially where I am now, I feel lost, but not in a bad way. Like I can't believe how big this is. But you're capable to just get to the main area boss and miss a ton of stuff, and it just allows you to do it. But if you go and hit all the optional points, you get optional bosses, you get optional enemies, you get different spells, different relics. But it also services the lore, which I realized. Like, as you do optional stuff, the lore changes in further parts based on it. And I don't know if that's like I don't know if there will be like different endings to the game or not, but I have seen in a little bit I played, if I hadn't done a thing, how the heck would this have happened in the next step? there's a part where you actually fight two bosses, and the battle ends when you beat one of the bosses, but you could defeat either of the bosses. And so it makes me wonder, like, if I had defeated the other one, would I have lost on what happens afterwards, or would it have been different? And so I'm fascinated with this, because it could have just easily been a straightforward game, but it has a lot of bells and whistles to it, like on a narrative focus point, but also just on variety of combat. And it's been very interesting for me.
It really does. I know exactly which boss you're talking about. And I was thinking the same thing. I was like, wait, what would have happened here? But again, going off of what you said, there is so much juicy lore in this game. Like seriously, the detail, if you go through and read the details on some of these enemies or bosses, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But also going off of what you're saying is there are so many different branching paths and things to do and places to go, and so many possibilities of missing so much stuff. So this game, in a classic open world-esque fashion, really rewards you for going out and exploring and going a different path and things like that, which I really, really appreciate. And there's so much cool stuff within this game, because the cutscenes continue to get better, the bosses continue to get better, that I literally do have a fear of like missing out.
Yeah.
Like I will spend so much time running around just to make sure I get every item or encounter every mini boss or things like that. So it's unbelievable how much they've crammed in to this game. There is so much stuff.
And they're not scared to get weird with it either. Like, there's a few instances where you're not even in combat anymore. You transform into animals, and you're in like a flight simulation portion.
Yeah.
Or there's a part in the game where I beat a boss, and then suddenly there was a 10-minute music video that played, which I didn't understand, but and it's also like artistically went from a 3D to a completely 2D hand-drawn music video, and I was like, okay, this game is willing to try some stuff out. And I'm actually very curious, because I thought I was in the first 10 hours I was like, okay, I think it can't be that big of a game, because it feels like I'm nearing it. I don't think that's the case at all. Now I'm 15 hours in, and I can tell already I'm maybe a third, if not less, of the game in. And there's a lot of possibilities in what could happen afterwards, especially on the challenge side. We talked about this off screen, but at first I thought, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I definitely, coming in from the Elden Ring DLC, it felt like, oh, okay, thankfully this is a game that like is not going to be extremely hard at the start, which is inaccurate, because it did not take very long for me to start hitting bosses where I was extremely challenged. A lot of bosses I beat in the first try, but a lot of the optional ones were so dramatically harder that I realized, like, okay, so there is like definitely more challenge in this. And now that I'm further in, there's definitely there are bosses I still cannot approach.
Right.
I'm realizing I just don't have it in me quite yet. But the beauty of it is that you're rewarded with XP, and you could build onto your character and come back to the boss afterwards. But yeah, it's been very cool. It's been very challenging for me, 15 hours in for sure.
And going off of the challenge too, again, I find it so interesting. Same thing. In the very beginning, I was doing really, really well. And then even early on, I encountered a boss that I was stuck on for a while. But then finally, when I figured out how to beat that boss, it like taught me a certain play style or certain mechanics to defeat this boss. And then after that, I went on a tear for a while where I was doing really good, like you said, first trying bosses. And then you'll encounter another boss where you're forced to play a certain way or use a certain technique, and I'll be stuck on that for a while. So the game does a really good job of, with bosses and with enemies, forcing you to get used to certain attack patterns or certain skills and things like that. So yeah, I can tell though, as we go further, this is going to get really tough.
Yeah, it's going to get really, really tough, because I'm right now. I don't think I'm anywhere near Elden Ring DLC quality of bosses yet. Like, it's not aggravating quite yet, but I'm hitting some bosses where I'm like, oh, every tactic I would use previously is not working. I'm getting decimated, and I can't even reach like mid health on their bar, and so which is not turning me off. It actually it entices me more to come play, and also go off the beaten path and start exploring, because a lot of times what happens too is I've realized that some of the main bosses that you have to fight have certain weaknesses, and those weaknesses are typically hidden in some of the supplementary optional bosses. So like if you beat an optional boss, you might get a spell or a transformation that is actually very useful against another boss. And they don't tell you that right off the top. You kind of have to read into the text and the journal and in the the power logs and stuff. Yeah. But it's very cool. It's very cool that I could go through this game and be completely blindsided from half of it and, fight a boss and maybe get through it. But then if I had gone off the beaten path, beat an optional boss, and that optional boss gave me like a poison power, I would be capable of fighting a boss and halving its health very quickly. And so it's been very cool. We'll definitely be talking more Black Myth Wukong, I think. I'd also be curious to see if they plan to ever expand on this, like if they want to do DLC or not. I'm not sure how that would work, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go that route, considering it's made so much money.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I completely agree with you. At this point, with how unbelievably successful this has been, it's actually wild to imagine them not either building further on it or certainly creating like a sequel of some sort. Yes, again, sure. I don't know where the story goes, but I mean, this was so successful, it sounds wild to not either add on to it or have a sequel.
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to build on this IP, and we'll probably see at the very least a sequel, which I'm excited for because lore-wise too, this has been very interesting. The enemy design is really up my alley. Like there's it has there's like a graduation from one enemy to the other where I start understanding like, okay, yeah, of course they talk about this is what this enemy would be. So yeah, it's been very neat. Do go and play it if you have your chance. I think it's on all consoles except Switch. So Xbox, PS5, you can get on PC. You're playing on PC right now?
No, I'm actually playing on PlayStation 5.
So am I.
Okay. And actually, Uno, I could be wrong, and maybe it was released, but I know it's intended to be released on Xbox, but there was actually a delay for it being released because there were some technical problems.
Okay.
So hopefully by now the game is on Xbox by the time you're listening to this. But yes, available on everything except for Switch.
Yeah, go out of your way and play it. My next week's plans is to play this for sure.
Me too.
You also had a chance to dabble in a big release that we had this week. I wanted to play it. I didn't get the chance, but Star Wars Outlaws just came out.
I did. So I've been looking forward to this game for a while, since it was announced, and then definitely when I saw some footage of the game itself. So Uno, I only played about 2 hours. I'm still very, very early into the game, but I'm telling you this, just like I'm going to finish Black Myth Wukong, I am definitely going to finish Star Wars Outlaws.
Awesome.
First of all, the characters are great. Your main protagonist is awesome, and your sidekick, Nynx, is just the cutest sidekick of all time, which is really cool. But again, as you're exploring, the game does a very good job early on of showing you in an organic way how to use these abilities that you have, which is very, very cool. So again, exploring through this town and exploring through this area, there's a ton of NPCs that are there. The world feels very alive, very interesting, and you want to continue exploring it. And then I briefly did get into a little bit of the combat, and it feels very fun. It's pretty simplistic in the sense of what you do with a blaster or a takedown and things like that, but it's fun to play. Very, very fun to play. And I'm actually playing it on PC, and the game looks beautiful, and it runs so smooth. I've had no hiccups whatsoever so far. But again, between the story being really interesting, the combat being really fun, I can tell that you're really going to be able to build on a lot of the things you do. There are abilities that you can unlock. There are different blasters that you can get. Just a bunch of cool stuff. The voice acting is great. It's an original, interesting Star Wars story that certainly very early on has made me go, oh, I can't wait to play it. Like, for example, later today, I am absolutely going to play even more. So far from what I've played, definitely really good, runs great, very, very interesting Star Wars game. So I highly recommend it. I think people, if you're a Star Wars fan, for sure play this. And I think even if you're not necessarily a huge Star Wars fan, I think you're going to have a good time with this one.
I definitely want to play it, especially because Star Wars' world has like a visual aesthetic. It has like that alien format where you could
Yeah.
see different aliens and different creatures and buildings and different spaceships and so on and so forth. So to me, like, at least I'm not a huge Star Wars guy, but I can respect the universe they've built, because every time, like, let's say I go to Universal or I go to wherever a Star Wars location may be, I'm always impressed. I'm like, oh yeah, I on a visual aesthetic alone, I can tell when something is Star Wars and when it is not Star Wars. And this video game, from what I've seen, definitely seems Star Wars. Like, it has the cute characters, the cute alien characters. It's got the gear and that weird, like, 80s futuristic look that Star Wars definitely has. And so I'm very excited to play it. My one question, you were talking about blasters and stuff.
Yeah.
Is this hand-to-hand combat, or is it third-person shooting combat?
So far, it's been a little bit of a mixture of both in a lot of different ways. For example, this is so early on in the game, so hopefully this is okay. But you can approach fights however you want in a lot of ways. For example, you can just go in with your blaster, third-person shooter style, and go nuts on everybody. Or you can do a more sneaky approach, where maybe you go behind a little corridor and you can get your companion, Nyx, to run up and distract one of the enemies, and then you can come behind and take them out silently. Or you can even get Nyx to, like, attack the enemy where he's just climbing all over the enemy, and then you just sprint with your main character and, like, knock him out and take him down. So and that's, again, just very early on within the game. So I generally am not much of a sneaker.
Yeah, me neither.
And so sneaking around. So again, but there are times where it's a really good idea to sneak based on how many enemies that there are. So, and again, so early within this game, I'm not even at the proper open world section yet. But again, it's shown me so many different techniques and things to do. Also, I really appreciate the hacking within this game. Like, there's a little, all I'll say is there's a little mini game that you have to do to, like, open these doors once you get this certain item. And that's been really, really fun. There's also games within the game, which I always really, really appreciate. This is in the very, very start, but getting to play like an arcade or something like that. So it's, there's a lot. They've given you a lot to do. And again, I've only scratched the surface on what it's been. And so far it's been fun. I'm a huge story guy, and this story seems like it's going to be a good one.
I'm very excited because I'm hopefully going to get my hands on it by next week, and we can talk a little bit further, especially because I'd be excited to hear what it feels like once you get into that big open area, because that's what the selling point of this game is. Of course, it's a Star Wars story, but this is the first Star Wars game to actually have a full realized open world format. And so I'd be very curious, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it next week's episode for sure.
I was going to say, next week for sure, I will be at the open world portion, and I'm very excited to talk even more about it. But again, so far from what I've seen, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one.
On my end, so I didn't get to play Star Wars. I did want to, but unfortunately, with travels and my Steam Deck not in on time, I got my PlayStation with me. And I wanted to get a bite-sized game because in the middle, I'm still playing Fortnite with this new Avengers season, and that's been enjoyable. Not a whole lot to add to that. And I played a bunch of Black Myth Wukong, but every now and then I need a little palate cleanser, and so I went searching on the more recent releases on PlayStation. And there's a new Metroidvania game called Crypt Custodian. It is by a single individual. This is his third Metroidvania game. He built ground up from him by himself, and his brother creates the music for it. And it's kind of a third person over the top, so kind of like a Bastion or Transistor. The combat is area based like that, and it's been very good. Like art style is very cute. Lore wise, it is you're a cat. And you're deceased, and so you're in like the afterlife, and you go up to your atonement on if you will go to stay in the underworld, or you'll go into what they call the palace, which would be like the heaven route, and you get stuck staying in the underground to become a janitor and clean. So you're given a broom, and so you're a cat with a broom, and it's mostly like combat and puzzles, but it's got a wide, like, I'm only 5 hours in. I thought I was nearing an end, and then I realized that that's not the case. In about 5 hours, I'm about 22% into the video game, and I've combed everything I've seen. So I may have missed some stuff because it is a Metroidvania game, and you get powers that will unlock different paths or help you break through certain objects and so on and so forth. But at the time being, with 5 hours in and 22% done, I'm realizing there's still a lot for me to explore, and it's it's kind of room based. So you go through paths. You end up on these like platforms, which I'll call a room. You'll get like a combat challenge. You defeat that, you can go on to the next thing. You can expand on your techniques, on your fighting techniques. So you could put kind of like in Hollow Knight, how you have the relics or the little badges that'll improve your leap or improve percentage on damage, or for example, will give you a wider reach or a faster attack. You can influence your own attacks that way. And so that's been very neat to play around with, because from one boss to another, some badges are way more useful. Sometimes I need to be more tanky because the boss will attack excessively, and so I'll need that extra damage input on my end. And sometimes I just need to hit the strongest attack possible, and so I'll gear my badges for that. And so yeah, it's very interesting. It had great reviews. I wanted to jump into it, and it's been very good. 4 or 5 hours in, I would highly recommend it. It's a great little Metroidvania that I've been playing as of yet, called Crypt Custodian, and challenging as well. There's a few bosses already, even puzzles too, where puzzles, and you know me, I love me some puzzles.
You love your puzzles.
There's a few of the puzzles, one that have very interesting mechanics, but then also simultaneously, I was like, oh crap, like this is, it's scratching this itch in my head that's making me feel real dumb, but also simultaneously, the second I figure it out, I'm like, okay, I'm the smartest individual in the world.
Yes.
So yeah, very interesting if you're in for a more bite-sized experience, or at least a new Metroidvania, because there's always Metroidvanias out there, but we're still waiting for the big one. We're still waiting for Silksong. And we'll talk about news very shortly, but no announcement of Silksong on Nintendo Indies this week. But if you are looking for a Metroidvania, this one's a very good one. Crypt Custodian, available on PC, PS5, and Xbox right now.
Nice. I'm definitely interested in that one. I love me a good Metroidvania.
I think this one would definitely be right up your alley. I think you would enjoy it for sure. Well, that's the games we've been playing this week, but that's not all that's happened in the world of video games this week. There's been a ton of news, including a Nintendo Direct, and we'll be talking about it right after this. And we're back with some news. The video game world continues on, and some big news have dropped in the last week, including a Nintendo's Indies showcase and a Nintendo third-party showcase. Yes. 2 directs in one day. It was a 45-minute direct, which I'm always down for more video game announcements. So to me, I know you streamed it live, right?
I did. One of my favorite streams to do. I love watching any showcase direct presentation, especially with the Chugs Army. It's always a blast. I'm like you. I love a good video game presentation.
That's my preferred way of doing it as well. If you want to watch one of the future ones, because it's down to happen again, twitch.tv/thechugs. He's doing it live. So Nintendo Direct in August, they announced a surprising amount of stuff.
Yes, they did.
I will say, not that there's a competition, but I'm less excited about the third-party stuff compared to the indie stuff. They showed a lot of indies, a lot of promising stuff. And while they did show a lot of third-party stuff, none of it really scratched the part of me that I needed. But here are some of the major releases. We'll talk about some of the indie stuff at the end, because both you and I had some indies that we were really, really excited for.
Yes, very much so.
Some notable releases from the Nintendo Direct, mostly the third-party one. Capcom is coming out with a new fighting collection, the Fighting Collection 2. This one is actually exciting for me for a couple reasons. It involves a ton of Dreamcast fighter games, such as, oh my god, what's the school one? Anyways, I forget the school name, but it includes two of my favorite games of all time that we have not seen on a console in quite some time. Power Stone 1 and 2, which is a incredible third-person party battle game. And it also includes my favorite Street Fighter game, Street Fighter Alpha 3, and Power Sword, which I had never played and will likely be jumping in this, as well as Capcom versus SNK 2 and a ton of other stuff. It will include, this is the first time that some of these Dreamcast games are on modern consoles, and every single game in there includes online multiplayer, so you can finally play Power Stone with all your pals. You can finally play Capcom versus SNK 2 with all your pals. So that's a very exciting one for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. I know based on the reaction to this, and I was thinking about this as well. Like as far as people who are fighting game players, the collections that have been dropping recently are unbelievable.
Oh, incredible!
Like, it's so awesome to see all these collections coming together.
Yeah, they also like more recently, and also they showcased it on this one. They announced a Marvel versus Capcom fighting collection, so that has like MV1, MV2, that X-Men game, and the Street Fighter versus X-Men one. Like it has a ton of content. Capcom just recently did a Street Fighter one. I'm sure we'll see a Mortal Kombat one because at this point, you know, if there's money to be made, the other developers are going to jump in on it for sure. I'm hoping we see a Tekken one. I'm hoping we see all kinds of Darksiders. I hope we get it as well. Darkstalkers.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, a lot of exciting stuff in the world of fighting games. But also a ton of collections in this Nintendo Indies, including Tetris Forever Retro, which includes I think every version of Tetris released previously. They listed some Tetrises that I didn't even know had different rule sets or weren't even aware of. So that seems very exciting for sure.
It really does. And Uno, I love this because recently Atari released a like 50th anniversary collection. And not only was it cool because of all the games, but the way that the UI was formatted and with the history and the almost documentary style stuff that they showed on this thing was so cool. So I love that they're doing the same thing for Tetris because Tetris, seriously, one of the most important video games of all time. So I think it's really awesome. They're giving it its due and creating a collection like this. I certainly, just for as you know, I love video game history. So aside from the fact that Tetris is fun, strictly for the history of video games, I can't wait to get my hands on this. It looks really cool.
Thanks for the reminder on the Atari thing, because I remember that presentation where they showed the kind of like, they have like a slide for each game that has a full description of when it came out, and it has design documents for everything. And like, that fascinates me even more so than just playing the video game. If I can have like the whole backstory on how it was created and what the thought process was, I'm hoping we get that for Tetris as well.
For sure.
Very, very excited for that. Another collection. This one is the Castlevania Dominus collection and includes Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia. I'll be honest, I haven't played a single one of these, but we just recently had a release of a Castlevania collection that is incredible. I'm not surprised we're getting more because there's a large portion of Castlevania games out there, and they all kind of jump in different like there's the original 2D Castlevanias, then you eventually have the 3DS and DS version games, all the mobile ones, then we have the 3D proper ones, which no one likes Castlevania 64, but I played that a whole lot. Very excited to see that Castlevania is coming around. I hope all of this means we'll get a new Castlevania soon.
I know. Oh my God! Please, or like a remastered Symphony of the Night, or something that would be so awesome. But I'm very excited about this collection. Once again, I actually own the two previous Castlevania collections. The one with the NES games on it. Then I have the Castlevania Advance collection. So this one also being added to the list certainly will be a game that I'm picking up on Switch. I also have not played through all of these, but I do love Castlevania. Yes. I really love Castlevania. So I'm excited to try these because many people regard some of these games as their favorite Castlevania games. But also, let's put it out in the universe, Symphony of the Night remaster.
Yes, please. Yes. Give it some love. Let us in.
Yeah.
Dawn of Sorrow especially is one that I constantly hear is one of the better ones, and I've never played it. So I'm likely to get this collection. I like Castlevania. Yep. I got the previous collection too, and I'm going through some of it. I haven't dabbled much into it, and that's why we haven't talked about it. But like, I want this collection, and I also just want new Castlevania for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
We also got that was on collections. We got a few remaster announcements. Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D remake. I honestly I'm very ignorant of the Dragon Quest world, but a lot of people are very excited for it, so that I'm excited for you. Suikoden 1 and 2 HD remaster. I've never played the Suikoden games, but that's another one of those games that, while I was a Final Fantasy kid when I was a kid, my friends who imported video games were like, no, you gotta play Suikoden. They're by far the better games. And so this might finally be the time I give that a shot, because they're getting a full HD remaster for the Switch. And then the third party, their final announcement is that Yakuza Kiwami, which is the the remake or the remasters of the original series of, I think, 1, 2, and 3, are coming to Switch, which is pretty fascinating. Those games are gigantic.
Huge.
And definitely not made for the Switch. Like, they were made for graphical powerhouses when they came out. And so it is very excited to see that Kiwami will be running on there. And it hopefully means there's a future world where the Yakuza games maybe come to the Switch 2 or something.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, this is very, very exciting for the Nintendo Switch players for sure. It was very surprising based on the size of these games, but it's so awesome that these games are going to be able to be played on the Switch. And you're right. Maybe in future releases with the Switch 2, that certainly seems like a possibility at this point.
For sure. And you know, that's like an open secret right now, is that Switch 2 will probably be announced sometime in the next 6 months. And so, you know, this felt in a lot of ways like Nintendo being like, these are the last things we're publishing. Here's all of it, you know, because this was a very lengthy one. But I'm very excited for what the future is. Now, that was the third-party stuff. They also showed some indies, and I will not name all of the indies, but there was some that I thought looked very interesting. That includes the Metal Slug Tactics game that they showed a little bit of. The developers of Gree made a new game that you were super interested in, what was the name again?
It was Neva.
Neva, yes, that's right.
Was the name? Yes.
The people that make Grease are the ones that made like hand-painted art for their video games.
Yeah.
One that I was super into, this one's a roguelike called Morsels. It has a very cool 16-bit aesthetic, and so very excited for that. Peglin is coming to full release on Switch. That's like a breakout pinball-style game. I spent a good 20 hours playing it on Steam Deck before when it was on early access, so I'm excited for that. And then Pizza Tower also dropped, and that was also only on PC and maybe on Xbox, and so now it's it's finally out on Switch as well. Other than that, the other big announcements were, and this is one that got you to re-download it, is Balatro came out with new custom decks for The Witcher 3,
Vampire Survivors, Among Us.
Yes, Among Us, and then here's the last one. I could see the image. Darn, I can't see what that is. But they dropped 4 new custom decks completely free. They dropped it day of. And honestly, it made me re-download Balatro. I played that game until I had only 2 things left to unlock, and now I'm like, now I'm thinking like, should I go and do it, because it dominated so much of my life. Am I ready for 20 more hours of Balatro? And I think I am.
Right. So truth be told, Uno, I know you would recommend it. I've heard it from many different people about how I got to try this game. And truth be told, with how massive my backlog has been, I never really got around to it. But with this announcement, with all these different collections, I'm like, this is a sign from the video game gods. I have to try Balatro now. What a cool addition that, like you said, is completely free. Completely free.
Yes, exactly. And so if you purchase Balatro, you get all of those custom decks. And then hopefully that also opens up for more future content and more future decks as well. I do know it is planned that Balatro will have a DLC early next year that will add new rule sets, new cards and stuff. So that is still going to be expanded upon. Other games, also the last few little ones that were of note. Coffee Talk is getting a sequel, Coffee Talk Tokyo. It's kind of simultaneously you're making coffee, so it's kind of like a brewing mini game, but it's a conversational video game where it's not dating, but you're having full-blown conversations and exploring each customer's life, and so that seems very interesting. And then as well, they showed a power wash simulator DLC for Shrek, where you get to clean the swamp that Shrek has. So if you're like me and you like Power Wash Simulator and you're looking for new content, that Shrek content's coming out, baby.
Right.
And that was most of it, but I'm always glad when Nintendo drops some stuff. It just means that they still have a lot left in the tank before Switch 2 comes out.
For sure. And I know we discussed this early on, but again, very, very fun direct. But I'll tell you, the indie showcase, I thought, really crushed it.
Yeah,
there were quite a few games I'm excited to check out and play.
I think like the third party was very heavy on like Japanese RPGs and stuff, and like that's just not my forte, where a lot of the roguelike and the pixel art stuff and the new hand-drawn Grease game, the indies portion definitely had a lot of heavy hitters for me, games that I will definitely be checking out.
Right.
All right, some more news. This one, Remedy. You know them as the people that made Control, Alan Wake, just recently made Alan Wake 2. Well, they have confirmed that the Alan Wake AMC TV show will no longer be happening, which is unfortunate, but they did announce a new partnership with Annapurna, developer of a lot of story-focused games, but also that expands upon to movie and TV shows. They are developing and producing a Control and Alan Wake franchise for both film and television. So the original AMC show is canceled, but that does not mean we will not get Alan Wake content. It looks like they're trying to sell off a Alan Wake and Control TV show and movie, which I'm fascinated for, because to me what Remedy does best is their really weird worlds and weird characters. And weird writing, and so I'm willing to see how that translates to TV, because they've already kind of tried and dabbled in it. They did Quantum Break that has TV in it. New Alan Wake 2 has a bunch of television in it, full motion video stuff. So very excited to see where that goes.
I completely agree. I think because again, like you said, Control and Alan Wake both have such interesting, intriguing, strange, awesome environments and worlds and characters, really. So if it's with the right studio, I can only imagine how cool like Control would look as a movie or TV show, and certainly for Alan Wake would be wild. I think that would do really well if done right.
Yeah, I think like an Alan Wake TV series would do incredibly, would crush it, because like it already has that like Twilight Zone aspect to it, as well as a built-in Night Spring Twilight Zone TV show, and I feel like that would really service a 10-episode miniseries, if not a long-form TV show. Big time. Some more news. This one on Valve and Sony. If you did not know, they both recently released hero shooters. Well, actually, Valve has not released theirs yet. It's not for public consumption, but it's kind of a high and low situation where Valve has not released Deadlock, their new hero shooter, but are getting incredible numbers on their beta testing and their pre-release, having 64,000 players daily, and at one point having over 100,000 players, and the game's not even released. Whereas Concord, Sony's new hero shooter, which has been released, is publicly available right now, has only reached 700 players in a day on Steam, which is surprising and kind of worrying, because that's, if you remember Concord was the one that had a cinematic trailer that kind of looked like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
And a lot of people were hyped on at least the aesthetic and the world building they did with that video, but it did not translate to any sales because no one seems to be playing it right now. So I think the reason Deadlock is exploding more so is that Valve does not make a lot. I was
curious on your answer, Uno. Sorry,
I think Valve doesn't make a lot of video games, right?
Yep.
And when they make a video game, they're held in such high regard, and they do so much testing and so much community building with it, where they put it in the hands of people, so a lot of people can play it in an early stage to eventually build upon it, that I think that has a very strong presence, because it's a Valve game, and I'll play anything Valve makes because they only make good games. Whereas I think Concord came out looking like Guardians of the Galaxy, and in a lot of ways probably confused people on an IP base, and just does not have. I don't think there's a strong attachment to anything they've shown. So unfortunately, it released so quickly without a bunch of like pre-footage coming out, pre-gameplay, and a lot of your Twitch streamers were not playing it ahead of the release, and I think that definitely damaged its sales.
Sure, that's a great point, because I was very curious, because it is interesting to see these stats, but you're absolutely right in the sense of anytime Valve makes anything, the entire video game world pays attention.
Exactly.
Because you're right, it's not all the time, but when it is released, it's always a great game every single time. So that does make sense to me.
And then on top of that, the interesting thing is that Sony is not a bad developer. It's not like Sony creates a game and then you're like, oh, I don't know. They've had some real stinkers. They don't.
Right.
Their last live service game is Helldivers 2, which is an immense success. So they know what they're doing. Right. But I just think a ton of people saw this kind of Guardians of the Galaxy-ish game and just never had an attachment to what kind of game it was. And so once it was released, I barely knew it was Concord after seeing that trailer, and that was 2 months ago, and I feel like nobody discussed it. And then it released kind of out of the blue 2 weeks ago, and no one seems to be playing it. It's unfortunate, but also kind of the way of what the hero shooter was doing. Overwatch 2 was not doing as well as Overwatch 1, and then everyone's given their try at a hero shooter before, and almost all of them have failed. And so I'm not entirely surprised, but I'm also not entirely surprised to see that Valve's is doing so well, because once again, if Valve is doing it, they're probably doing it very right. They're accustomed to having games built and completely scrapping them if they don't believe in them before.
Yep.
So they definitely do believe in this one, because they've been really testing it a ton, and I'm actually excited to eventually get my hands on it for sure.
Yeah, me too.
Last week we talked about we wanted a Dino Crisis remake collection. Well, bad news. Shinji Mikami, the creator of Dino Crisis and Resident Evil, has gone on and said that there is no space for a Dino Crisis remaster. He says there's not a lot of space because a new Dino Crisis game would be from the successors of Monster Hunter series, and there's too much Monster Hunter still to make. It's incredible that they would go out and just say no, and not kind of leave it open-ended. I was kind of surprised by that, because usually what you do is you're like, oh, maybe we would, and see if there's any interest. But they've been honest and just straight up said that, like, we have huge projects at Capcom. Monster Hunter is a one of those huge projects, and the teams are going to be working on that instead.
And to be fair as well, of course, the Monster Hunter series and franchise does incredibly well. These games are so awesome, so amazing. But still, selfishly, it'd be really, really nice to get a Dino Crisis remake, man. It'd be so nice.
It would be really nice. And actually, so in this interview, he was asked about Dino Crisis, and he was actually puzzled. He's like, oh, wow, I'm surprised people still like it this much. I just don't think it's as strong as other stuff. But if I had my choice of a remake, I wouldn't do Dino Crisis. In fact, I would do an NES game called Sweet Home, which because you're a huge Resident Evil fan, but is the influence for Resident Evil.
Yes, exactly. So I'm very aware of what Sweet Home is and how important that was to one of the greatest horror franchises of all time, that being Resident Evil. But I've never played Sweet Home before. So the idea of them remaking Sweet Home to where I could play it and experience that story, that origin or inspiration of what Resident Evil became, would be incredible. I would be so excited if they remade Sweet Home.
Yeah,
I didn't even think that was in their mind. So for them to even consider that,
I personally would I'm championing the idea of making a Dino Crisis remake, but I actually would much prefer a Sweet Home remake because I've never played it, and I feel like because it's an NES game, it is hard to go back to, especially on a horror-based game. If they made it to a current console in a way that is more manageable and easier to digest, I would definitely jump into a Sweet Home remake right now.
Oh, 100%.
Other news. I don't know if you know this. Croc is coming back.
Yes.
27 years after the release of Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, it is getting a remaster. So this is like, so Nintendo created this. Eventually, the backstory of Croc is this. They were supposed to make a 3D Yoshi platformer.
Yep.
And Nintendo said, no, we're not doing that. I'm sorry. Well, the people that worked on that ended up creating Croc as an easy patch for it, and it became one of the best-selling PS1 video games at the time. And it's like, Croc is one of those games. I actually never played Croc. But at the time, mascot puzzle platformers were
huge.
All the rage. You know, 3D puzzle or 3D platformers with mascots. You had Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and so on. I was huge into the N64 ones, so like PS1 was not what I ended up dabbling in. But I had Gex, I had Glover. But you played a bunch of Croc.
I have a lot of experience with Croc. So again, everything that you just said, all that's true. First of all, Croc coming out around the same time as like a Super Mario 64, regarded as like one of the greatest, if not the greatest 3D platformers of all time. It had some tough competition, but me and my younger brother played Croc for hours and hours and hours. There's something so charming about this game. Don't get me wrong, the analog control for Mario 64 was certainly easier to use versus like the D-pad with Croc. But I, to this day, if you've not listened, because I love video game music, if you have not listened to the Croc soundtrack, it's incredible. I still, to this day, sometimes go back and listen to some of the music, specifically like the world map theme. It's great. You just can't help but feel good. Listen to the Croc Legend of the Gobbos world map theme and just try not to smile. I dare you. I dare you. But no, it's, again, I had a lot of fun with it. Obviously very similar to 3D platformers. You're just collecting different items and things like that. But the bosses were fun. Croc is adorable. And again, I actually wish, and I think quite a few people have experienced it. For anyone who's listening, let me know in the comments if you've played Croc Legend of the Gobbos. But I love this game. So this is another one that I'm so shocked. I never in a million years thought they were going to remaster this. So I'm unbelievably excited that they're going to remaster it. And once we're done with this, my brother is the first person I'm telling about this. He's going to be so excited.
Well, to give you an idea, like a lot of people must have played it because it is one of the best PS1 selling games of all time. And to give you an idea, it's outsold Dino Crisis, Final Fantasy Tactics, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. It was
wow.
It's a pretty immense game, and I had no idea it was this popular. But I guess at the time,
either. That's incredible.
At the time, PS1 didn't have a ton of puzzle platformers 3D platformers to rival the N64 ones, and so Croc was like a big answer to that for the PlayStation.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll probably play this now that it's gonna be remastered. I'll go back. So
Uno, that would make me so happy, so happy if you did. But yeah, that stat of knowing how well it sold is incredible. I'm so glad that it did so well, and I'm so glad that an entire new generation of people, 27 years later, are gonna get to experience this fun 3D platformer. So.
I also think like it might be time for the mascot platformer to come back. You know, Ratchet and Clank did bonkers the last few bit. Astrobot's just around the corner, and I feel like we're about to get a new like revolution of those. Maybe Croc's ahead of the game. Maybe they knew this would be a good time for it.
That's true. Yeah, let's bring it back. Let's get a ton of 3D platformers. That'd be amazing. I love that genre.
And then on a similar note, but a bad note, Crash Bandicoot 4. You probably played it. It was available on PlayStation, on PS Plus. It was given in that it's on PlayStation Plus right now. If you want to go play it, go out of your way and play it. Incredible game.
Awesome.
Well, the sequel, Crash Bandicoot 5, has been shelved in favor of a few live service games, according to an article. They said that the main reason is that while Crash Bandicoot 4 had great reviews, the low amount of sales was not worth the investment in a new Crash Bandicoot. So instead, Activision is investing more in live service games, which is unfortunate. That is unfortunate for sure.
It's very unfortunate, Uno. I have a massive attachment to Crash Bandicoot, like massive attachment. That was like the first game that I properly played on the PlayStation. Again, Crash was one of my favorite mascots, or one of my favorite characters in gaming. He still is. But I have so many great memories. Uno, I hope you don't mind, but I can tell a story really
Please,
quickly.
please. I love story time.
So part of my attachment to Crash is my favorite snow day of all time happened involving Crash Bandicoot. So again, the snow was really, really coming down. Me and my brother, we were younger. And my mom said, hey, I'll take you to the video store and we can rent a video game. And at this time, we didn't have the internet. We weren't subscribed to magazines. We had no idea what games were releasing. We would just go to the video store sometimes and see what was out. And that day, me and my brother turned the corner, and there is Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. We lost our minds. We're like, oh my God, there's a Crash Bandicoot 2. I can't believe it. We were able to rent the game. We went home as it was snowing outside, and me and my brother took turns playing the game back and forth, back and forth. And then when we had to take a break because we couldn't stare at the screen, for too long at one time, we would go outside and we would play Crash Bandicoot. My brother was Crash Bandicoot and I was Cortex, and I would just chase him around in the snow. And then after a little bit, we were allowed to come back in and play it again. So to this day, Crash Bandicoot 2 is my favorite Crash game of all time. Not only because it genuinely still holds up and is a great game, but that memory is just burned into my brain. And I think so many of our favorite games, or so many of our favorite moments, whether it's as kids or adults, are attached to a specific game and a specific moment that you had in time. Mm-hmm. So again, that Crash Bandicoot 2 moment is burned into my brain. I loved Crash Bandicoot 4. So this is absolutely a bummer for me. Maybe eventually.
It's sad news, but it doesn't mean that Crash will be completely dead. I'm sure at some point they'll make a bite-sized version, or Sony doesn't have a lot of mascots, and Crash is one of them for sure. And yes. I can't foresee a future where they don't try to re-tap into it. It's just right now, Crash Bandicoot 5 is not a reality. They're leading into the live service games because that's where the money is sometimes, obviously not all times. So I respect that. That's fine. I always have Crash Bandicoot 4 to go back to, thankfully.
That's right.
That's it for the news of the day, but that is not all. We will be right back with our community mailbag right after this. Hello, and we're back to All Elite Arcade. It's time for our favorite segment of the show.
Yes.
It's the community mailbag. You can get your questions answered by myself and the Chugs right here on All Elite Arcade. All you need to go and do is go to tbs.com/arcade mailbag, send your video game focused questions, and we will answer them right here. Genuinely, and I know we say it every time, but this is our favorite segment.
It really is.
We have received an immense amount of very interesting questions, and a lot of times it makes me go into a part of my brain that often I don't think about or I don't go delve into. And it's very neat to go back and look back on my childhood, or even like classify games in a certain section that I hadn't thought about. So we were really appreciative of you guys. So go to tbs.com/arcade mailbag. We will get your questions answered.
Yes, absolutely. So the first question we have today is from Archie. Archie, thank you very much for sending in your question. Hey, Chugs and Uno. We've heard you guys talk a lot about horror games on arcade, and I was just curious, what do you think are the elements that make a horror game truly scary or creepy? Love that Nyla gave a shout out to one of my all-time favorite horror series of all time, Fatal Frame. Another one I would recommend is Super Scary Play, despite the fact that it has 8-bit graphics, is Faith, the Unholy Trinity.
Yes.
Check it out if you get a chance. Archie, thank you for the question and the recommendation. But Uno, what do you think? What do you think adds to the elements of making a horror game truly scary or terrifying or creepy?
So first off, Faith is a great recommendation. If you haven't played it, that's a great 8-bit horror game.
I have not, so...
Yeah. You should definitely try it. It's definitely it's very creepy. To me, the two main factors of it is that I watch a lot of horror stuff. I love hauntings, haunted houses. I love horror movies of all kinds, be it stressful, be it gory, and so on and so forth. And I'm truly never ever scared at them. But a video game is completely different to me, and I think a big part of what makes me terrified in a video game is that I'm in control. I'm not an observer anymore. I physically have to do the motions that get me in peril, and for whatever reason, that part of my brain gets terrified when that happens. So I'll give you an example, like PT is my main example, but like knowing I have to physically make the joystick motions to go around that corner, and I know by the third loop there's something waiting for me, my brain tells me like you shouldn't do it. But if I was watching someone do it, I wouldn't be terrified because I have to do it. You know, watching it, I'm now an observant, and I'm like, okay, it's not happening to me. I'm okay. That's fine. But when I play a video game, even though it isn't really happening to me, it's on a television screen, my brain is convinced that I am at fault if something happens. So if I go through that corridor, I made that choice, and so it really terrifies me. And then the second thing too is I think there's so much in video games that is established. You know, like to go back to PT, but I'll also talk Resident Evil as well. PT, you knew that shape of the location is that L-shaped hallway. You do the L-shaped hallway, you come back. But anytime they divert from that, your brain is like, oh, I'm not in the same space. That doesn't make sense. You already established this into me. And like some of my favorite scares in video games are like that. Resident Evil 7, you're in a room and you've explored it twice, and you assume these are your entry points. You know? I can walk around this hallway. This guy can only go through there, and he can only go through there. And so when they shatter that illusion, and like one of the bosses just breaks through a wall and he's in front of you, it's one of the most terrifying things that happens to me because my brain thinks I understand the rules of what a video game is, and because I think I know those rules, if they mess with them, it makes it so much scarier. That to me, I think, is the two main factors as to what I think is creepy about video games.
For sure. That definitely adds to the creepiness. And I also have two answers. Number one, and I know we kind of briefly discussed this last week, but vulnerability is something that really adds to the creepy factor for me. Lots of times, if I'm playing a horror game and I just have so much ammunition and so many weapons, and I know that anything that gets into my path, I'll be able to fight and defend myself with, I'm less creeped out. When I'm in a situation where I have 3 handgun bullets and there's 5 enemies around, then I start to get scared because there's so much that can go wrong. So the vulnerability. But the second, and I think number one for me as far as what makes a game scary, is the game's sound design.
Yes.
Whether that is really eerie music that is playing and then it stops as you turn a corner, or whether it's like a shrieking loud sound that comes out of nowhere. Again, good sound design with wearing like good headphones and playing a horror game. So much of the times that I jump or I'm afraid is all the sound design. Don't get me wrong, what's on the screen is creepy as well, but if your horror game is designed well with sound, it's that adds so much to the creepy factor for me. So much. So Archie, thank you very much for the question. Great question.
Yes, great question, Archie. This next one is from John. John says, hey, Uno and Chugs. First of all, love the Mankind homage at All In Uno. Thank you. And can't wait to see you back, Adam. Never stop the podcast. I look forward to it every week. Now the question. Since you have both been loving the Elden Ring DLC and can't wait for the someday release of Silksong, it got me wondering, which type of content do you appreciate more? Do you prefer well-made DLC that capitalizes on an already good game, or would you rather they save it all for a content and channel it into a next great sequel? We live in a world where you get to have both, but not always the time for it. Which do you prefer as a veteran gamer? Great question, John.
Very good question. So, John, for me personally, and like you said, it's so nice that we live in a world where we kind of get both of those games. Some games we will have DLC. Other times it's just waiting until the sequel. But for me, lots of times, especially when it's a game that I love dearly, I absolutely love when DLC capitalizes on an already great game.
Yes.
If there's for example, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, I loved the DLC of that game. They did add some new mechanics or new ways to fight and things like that, but it really is just the original game with more story, more music, more combat. It's more of the game that I love dearly. Same with the Elden Ring DLC. Again, they did add a lot of new things, But I wanted to be in the lands between again so badly. And with that DLC, I got the chance to do that and be in the Elden Ring world. So I do love when it's a game that I adore. I love when we get DLC, especially if it's story driven DLC. That makes me even more excited. So yeah, I'm a big DLC guy for games that I love.
So I'm actually in the same boat. I think I thought about this, and I think if I was younger, I would have said a sequel is more interesting, and I would never spend money on DLC. But now that I realize, like, DLC is not bite-sized content anymore. It's immense expansion on a world, and now I'm of the mind that if you're just tacking on to an already established story, or you're building on an already like a frame set of rules, it's better to be DLC. Like, some of my favorite experiences are DLC, like the BioShock DLCs, Elden Ring DLCs. And while BioShock 1 jumps to BioShock 2 and BioShock 2 jumps to BioShock 3, what I liked about BioShock 3 as a sequel is a completely different setting, and so therefore not nearly attached to BioShock 2. Whereas BioShock 2's DLC is so attached to the main game story, I much prefer it being a DLC. So while I like both, I think at a price point, and also when I love a game, I would much rather have a DLC piece where I know it supports this game that I already love. I'll get the sequel too, don't get me wrong.
Yep. For
like,
sure.
Silk Song I will get. Even if they had released it as a DLC, I would get it as well. But I also feel like the reason they're making it not a DLC is it's probably its own little thing now. It's not tacked on to the original experience. It's like you're loading from a completely fresh start, and you're probably going to get a fresh perspective rather than a DLC where the Elden Ring DLC, it's quite literally you have to understand the entirety of Elden Ring to jump into the next DLC. And I like that. I like that now when you purchase a video game, there's still a chance that you get more out of it a year later. Of course, there's a price point to it, but everything does. But I'm of the mind DLC is the way to go.
Yeah, for sure.
Great question, John. Thank you so much.
Yes, John. Thank you. And next up from Beautiful Mo, thank you very much for the question. Hey, boys, one of my favorite video game essay YouTubers, Jacob Geller, did a recent video on video game graphics called The Best Looking Game Ever. Highly recommend you check it out when you get a chance. Absolutely. But the question is, with that said, what to you are the best looking games of all time when you consider art style and design and not necessarily realistic graphics? Great question.
That's a great question. To me, the first one that pops into my head, and this is based on, like, I think realistic graphics is very interesting conceptually, but I also know at some point there's only so much you could do. Like in the last 10 years, adding sweat or adding the rays of light is kind of where the expansion was. What I think when I think beautiful is stuff that will live on forever and ever and have its own style. So for me, the first thing that I could think of is the Donkey Kong series. It has its own visual aesthetic. It does not matter. If I play that in 30 years, I will still love the visual elements of it. I will still love the obviously the audio is a big portion of it, but it has a unique and precise look to that series. And then on the other side of it too, I think 2D art, even though it is 3D rendered sometimes, is an incredible thing because it will live on forever. So for example, I think Persona 4 and Persona 5, those are the type of games that I think down the line, 50 years from now, will still be like, hey, what a beautiful game that was. And a lot of it is because stylistically it has an incredible idea of its own styles and concepts, but also it has an art style that can live on onwards and onwards. Like, for example, Super Mario 64, one of my favorite games, but I don't think artistically it will live on 50 years from now. It will definitely look dated, but Super Mario World may, because that 2D art will go on forward and forward.
Right, that's so true. What I love so much about this question is, again, there are so many different art styles to me within gaming that are beautiful. Like one that sticks out to me is Gears 5, which released on the Xbox One. That game still looks absolutely unbelievable.
Yep.
And that's going kind of its own approach, the more realistic looking approach, if you will. But then I also think the Borderlands franchise, I love the cartoony look of Borderlands games. And I do think that will also live forever. But the two that really stick out to me where I'm like, ooh, this is unbelievably special is that Octopath Traveler art style where it's like the 2D but 3D kind of pops out. Like it's so appealing to the eye. It's such a cool looking game, such a cool looking world that I think, again, going off of what you said, Uno, will be an art style that will stand the test of time. But the other thing I would really like to see more of, because we saw a preview of this, but I love the claymation style of gaming. So like, I know we have a game coming out soon. I can't recall the name, but the claymation just looks so beautiful to me. But like Skull Monkeys, for example, had like that claymation type of look. And I just think it looks so cool. I love claymation movies and I love claymation video games. So again, what's so great about this is there are so many different art styles, like you had mentioned, Mo, and so many that are beautiful in their own way. So beautiful, Mo. Thank you very much for the question. Really appreciate it.
Yes, great question. And also that made me reminded me we should get a new clay fighter at some point. With the advancement of like technology now, I bet it would look incredible.
Oh, it would look so good.
This last question is from Travis. Thank you in advance, Travis. Hi, Uno and Chugs. I wanted to ask you who or what your biggest influence on your early gaming habits and choices were when growing up. And what are the sources that influence you to pick up and play a game nowadays? Great question, Travis.
Travis, very good question. So for me personally, as far as who influenced me to play the games that I played, truth be told, it was my younger brother. My younger brother was diehard into video games from a very young age, and I loved playing games as well growing up. But so many times, what he was really excited to play, I ended up being really excited to play. We have a very similar taste in games, so that played a huge part. But as far as what I look for now, and I know this has kind of been discussed with us before, Uno, where maybe we differ a little bit. But to me, I love storytelling. I love absolutely incredible stories. And I really mean this. Video games are one of, if not the best platform to tell stories. So that's the first thing I look for. If it seems like this is going to be a really interesting story that's going to stick with me for a really long time. And then also at least how I've been playing lately. And I am so guilty of this. If your game is a Souls-like, I'm going to play it. If your game is a Metroidvania, I certainly want to play it and check it out. So I think those two genres are ones that really stick out to me. And other than that, it's just incredible storytelling that I kind of look for. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
For myself, a lot of my early gaming influences were from my best friends at the time, Yan and Frank. So, like, for example, I was an N64 kid, and I knew everything about the N64 and Super NES. I had this Nintendo Power magazines, but then my friends would have a PS1. Or a Sega Genesis, and so they would come in and influence me on like, you gotta play Sonic 3, it's the greatest game of all time, or they'd be like, come to my house and play Metal Gear Solid. And then a lot of what they would share with me ended up becoming what I was interested in. That's how I blossomed into becoming a Metal Gear Solid fan. That's how pro wrestling games was because of my friends as well, and a lot of like their influence is what I end up playing nowadays. Nowadays I'm very similar to you. Not in the story aspect. While I do like a good video game story, I'm more of a mechanical-based guy, and which means that certain genres will speak to me almost instantly. So if you say, hey, this game is a Metroidvania, and I like the art style, I'm going to play your game. I know for sure, because mechanically, I understand that, and I know exactly how to approach it, and I really enjoy those type of games. But also, on another aspect, roguelikes are the same way too. If you've got an interesting art style and you say you're a roguelike, and so I know I can make incremental changes to my thing. I know that every time I play it, the loop will be somewhere between 20 to 40 minutes, and I can get some form of like checklist marked off. Like that definitely plays to what I like. And so nowadays, what typically is what I'll play is what genre I'm into. Or if it's not in the genre I like, it's got to come from a suggestion from a friend, or it has to be so highly rated on pre-releases that I tell myself I have to experience this. You know, I may not be into a racing game, but this has got a 9 out of 10 everywhere. Chances are I might be into this. And so that's usually how I make my choices nowadays. And great question, though, Travis. Thank you so much. And I hope you will send out some more questions to us. Get your question here on the community mailbag at tbs.com/arcade mailbag. We're looking forward to answering your questions on the next few episodes. That's it for today's All Elite Arcade. It was a good one. We'll be back next Monday as always. You can find myself on Twitch, twitch.tv/eviluno. I'm pretty sure the Chugs, you're playing Black Myth Wukong this week.
That's right. That's what we're streaming all week, baby.
That's right.
Twitch.tv/thechugs for anyone interested.
So do check us out. That is where we play our video games. We'll be jumping on stream this week. And make sure you go to youtube.com/awgames if you want to see the visual format. There's videos of ourselves doing these podcasts. You can watch our faces as well as some of our gameplay and some of the footage down below. Go to youtube.com/awgames and hit that subscription button. We will see you next week on Monday for an all-new episode of All Elite Arcade. Bye-bye.